Hi people, so today we're working on 6.4 and it's the curve of best fit. But at this point we have most of the tools that we need to do this. A curve of best fit is just like a line of best fit, except that it's going to be curvy instead of a straight line. So this is good for quadratics and cubics and everything else. And this is a pretty classic type of problem that you're going to see on your test or on your exam. So this is great practice for exactly what we're going to need. Alrighty. Kayla suffered from a migraine and had to take medication for it. The table below is the concentration of medication in Kayla's blood as time passes. Notice time is on the left, and that's going to be our independent variable. Typically, your independent is on the left and your dependent is on the right, but that's not always necessarily the case. It's just a good, general rule that that's what happens. And that's how you should set up your tables if you ever have a table. Alrighty, so they gave us a bunch of information. The concentration seems like it kind of increased and then kind of decreased over time. So let's try this. Determine the equation for the quadratic regression. Now, first of all, quadratic leads me to believe it's going to be kind of a U, upside down U, or a right side up U, and regression. Now, reminder, regression is just a fancy way of saying like line of best fit. In your calculator, they call it a regression, or like reg, so that's why we're calling it here. Alrighty, so we're going to have to do some things before we can find the regression, and the first thing we have to do is tell our calculator about this table. So let's just say enter table into calc. So reminder of that, because it's been a couple days. I had this random graph in my calculator. I'm going to go stat. So let's write it down. 1 for edit. And then I had the last stuff that we were doing together in here. And I'd like to clear it. I don't want to clear each one individually. So I go up to the top, you hit clear and enter. Go over to the next one. Clear, up to the top, clear and enter. And then I'm good to just type in all these values. We have to be careful, because if we type in one number in wrong, we're going to get a wrong answer. We're not going to know why. So I usually type it in and then I try to just take a quick look over it, make sure that I got all those decimal points right. So it's like the most frustrating mistake you can make. And I have a beautiful table full of stuff. So that's my first step. Now, I actually want to find the regression equation. So here's step 2 that I'm going to do. Find regression. And by regression, they mean equation. So I should have something that says y equals something. Now that I have this data in here, I'm going to go stat, over to calc, and I'm going to have to pick the right one that I want here. So I'm just going to write this down. Stat, little arrow, calc. And I'm going to have to pick the one that makes the most sense for us. So we have used linreg for linear equations. They gave us a hint that this is going to be a quadratic, so quadreg sounds about right. So 5 for quadreg. Quadreg. And I might have to hit enter. You might have to hit enter a few times, but this is the form that I should have. It tells me what my equation should look like, and then it tells me my coefficients and my constant. So my next step here is just to write it down. And we write it down in this form. We don't say a, like we don't copy this whole thing down. We say it in this form. So we say y equals, we say the a value, negative 41.23, x squared, gotta have that x squared in there, plus b, 122.05, we're using 2 decimal places. You'll notice that's just x, and then plus c, 2.71, and that doesn't have any decimal places on it. Good? All right, so that's my equation. All right, now I would like to work with this equation because my next step is determine the intercepts, so the x-intercepts and the y-intercepts, and say what do they represent. So to be able to work with this, I have to graph it in my thing, and then I can use all the tools that we've been talking about. So step 3 And these are the steps you're going to do most of the time. You won't always have to find the regression equation. Sometimes they'll just give it to you, and sometimes you'll have to go from there. So sometimes you don't have to do steps 1 and 2, but then 3 is kind of our next step. Now, what I want to do is I want to copy and paste this into where I put my equations. But I don't want to put the rounded version. I want to put this with all these decimal points, and I don't want to have to write them all down because that sounds terrible. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave this on our screen, not hit clear. We're going to go to y equals, which is where we put our equations, clear anything that we have in there already. And this is where we're going to copy and paste. So copy and pasting looks like this. We go vars, right here, vars, 5 for statistics, over to EQ, hit 1 or hit enter, and it copies and pastes it perfectly with all the decimal points in for me. So third step is I want to copy and paste and graph. The graphing part's easy because you just hit graph. But so I went y equals, that's where we put our equations in, and then this is my copy and paste part. I went vars, 5 for statistics, I can't remember now, 5 for statistics, over to EQ, and then 1 for reg EQ, regression equation. Don't want to do it again, I don't know if it'll type it in again. And then last up, I'm just going to hit graph so that I see it on my graph, hopefully. Oh boy, that looks like a vertical line. So that's my steps for that. Unfortunately, whenever I graph something, I probably have to adjust window settings. So step 4, windows. Now this is a great starting point because at least I can see something. I think I'm going to have to work on adjusting this a little bit though. Now adjusting your windows takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of thinking of what do I want to see more of. So right now this looks like a very, very straight line, and it's supposed to be a quadratic, so I'm kind of surprised that it would be such a straight line like this. So I would like to see more up, because I think that's kind of our values. And if I really think about it, here's all the values that I should be able to see. So I'm going to adjust my window settings so they look a little bit closer to the values in here. So going to window right here, let's adjust our X a little bit. And I'm going to make my window a bit bigger than what this is, just in case I need that. So X starts at 0 and goes up to 2.5. So I want to start at 0 and go up to 2.5, but make it a little bit more inclusive than that. So let's go like -1 to 5 maybe, instead of 0 to 2.5, just to make sure we have everything included. And going up by 1 is fine. Concentration, we start at 0, and our highest value is 90 something. So let's go from like -1 to say like 150, 120, something like that. Just, you know what? Maybe not. Maybe because this is a quadratic, that'll be around our vertex. Maybe let's just go up to 100. Maybe that'll be good enough. We can always change this later. And I think counting from 1 to 100 by 1s is a little crazy, so I'm going to count up by 10s, just so it doesn't take my calculator years to graph this. And let's hit graph. Oh, beautiful quadratic. That's nice. Alrighty. So we might have had to adjust it more than one time. That's totally fine. And as we answer the questions, we might have to adjust it, and that's just part of it. Alrighty, so these are kind of the steps we're going to have to do every time. You're going to get so good at doing them, and putting these steps and what buttons to press on your graph on your study sheet is a really good idea. So here's the type of question we might get. Determine the concentration of her blood after 1.75 hours. Is that an X or a Y value right there? I'd say that's an X value, it's time, so X equals 1.75. When I have an X value and I want to find a Y value, I can use this form, this steps right here, and this is for earlier in your booklet if you want to look back at it. So X is 1.75, I'm going to go second trace, value, I want to find a value, so I hit 1 or enter, X equals 1.75, that's what we're looking at. and it poops out a y value, and it even shows me on my graph. It's kind of hidden in this number up here, but it shows me right on my graph right there, and there's my y value. So concentration is 2 decimal places, 90.05 unit. Well, it told me up here concentration is milligrams per liter. So milligrams, that's a milligram per liter. There we go. Nice. I'm just going to write down the steps in here because that's probably helpful. So 5, I'm not going to put 5 anywhere because we're not going to do this every time. So what I did here is I went second, trace, 1 for value. I put in x equals 1.75, and I just hit enter. And it showed me that value. Okay, kind of going the other way now. Determine when the concentration is 70 milligrams per liter. So this time they give me the y value. And that's the more annoying way. Your calculator doesn't have a great way of doing that. So here, to find an x value when we're given a y value, we have to go into our graph, go into where we put equations. Do not erase that because that would be annoying to have to retype in. Go down to a new line. We're going to put 70. Take a look at the graph. And what we want to know is, where do these two lines intersect? Because that'll give us 70 milligrams per liter. And there's actually going to be 2 different answers here, one on the way up and one on the way down. So we're going to have to find 2 separate answers. We might even have to find like more than 2. And that's super reasonable. So steps, we go y equals, we throw in a 70, and then we go second trace. We always go second trace. Like that's kind of what we always do, isn't it? 5 for intersection. 5. You have to pick one first. I'm going to do the left one first. It's going to ask me for first curve, second curve. So this time we just have to get close to it. I don't want to be over here because they're also going to give me that one. So I just move closer to this one, hit enter. Yeah, second curve, sure, hit enter. So then you hit enter 3 times. Enter times 3. So I have to write down enter 3 times. So there's my first intersection. So at 0.73, and our unit is hours. And I know I have a second answer, so I'm going to say and we're going to do these steps again. Second trace, no, made it worse, didn't it? Second trace, 5 for intersect. This time I'm going to move over to the one on the right, so it tells me the right one, or else it'll just keep telling me the left one over and over again. Hit enter 3 times. Just got to get close to it, so it kind of knows which one you're looking at. 2.23 hours. So it happened 2 times during her migraine relief. Alrighty. Last one on the page here. Determine the maximum concentration of medication in her system. How long after medication is the maximum reach? So I want to know, when do we reach this top value right here? I really don't need this line in here anymore, and you could probably leave it. I just don't want it to confuse me. So I'm going to go down and clear it. Make sure I don't clear the equation because it'd be super annoying to have to put back in. So just to get rid of that so I'm not accidentally on that one somehow. And I want the maximum. Guess what? We're going back to this second trace little page here, and we're going to look for the maximum. Sometimes the minimum will be more interesting, so we do the minimum, and it basically be the same steps, but we're looking for maximum. So we hit 4 for maximum, and we go down, hit enter. You go on the left-hand side of it. It's too bad it's kind of into my number, so I could change my window settings, but I think it's good enough for me to just deal with it. Go over here, hit enter again. And we have a beautiful point. So I'm going to write down these values, and I'm going to remind myself that the x values is days and the y value is concentration. So when I answer my question here, determine the maximum concentration, that's 93.05 milligrams per liter. How long after taking it? Well, that's the number of hours, 1.48 hours. And there we go. So to get that, I went second. Doesn't really look like a 2, does it? Second trace, I went 4 for max. And then I did the left bound, right bound stuff, which is starting to feel pretty tedious at this point. Alrighty, so there is another one on the back page that you can give a shot at. Then there is a old exam question. And that's where we're going to stop for today. We're going to do some of these old exam questions tomorrow together. So on the next page, try that one on your own and see how it goes. Otherwise, have a good night.